in front of us today. I'm going to get straight into the issues, if I may, before I hand over to my colleagues. And the first thing first I'd like to ask you is how events in the Middle East have impacted your thinking on readiness?
I think the first thing I'd say is, how do we think about readiness? And I think readiness for the service at the moment is across two areas where it pertains to the Middle East. Firstly, do we continue to be ready to deliver all the other tasks that are placed upon us? We are a globally deployed Navy. We operate in a number of areas around the world. A number of you will have experienced the Batch 2 OPVs. You will have seen a number of ships that we're currently have in the North Atlantic. Both aircraft carriers are deployed, and of course we can continue to deliver the independent nuclear deterrent. So on a day-to-day basis, our readiness is that 50% of the fleet is either at sea or at very high readiness to deploy. But specifically, therefore, against that baseline, what does this mean for the Middle East? And the architecture that we look at is, what are the contingency plans or contingency options we might be asked to undertake, and how are we posturing accordingly? And that sense of readiness being an ever-present mindset doesn't change. What does is then assessing a range of likely tasks and setting accordingly. And I would observe that the Littoral Response Group is in the Mediterranean. It has set itself for a range of potential activity. We have ships allocated to NATO. HMS Duncan is currently part of the NATO task group, and in fact we currently provide the one-star commander for the NATO task group in the Middle East. And we continue to offer and think through a range of likely scenarios or options that CDS can then work with ministers to consider advice and choices for the Prime Minister. So readiness is something that we do all the time, and then you cleave across that, not just what we do today, but what we might be asked to do tomorrow. And that's how we balance the readiness question that we have.
It's another event that adds to the already significant burden that there is on the Royal Navy, though, is it not?
It is indeed. I mean, this committee has wisely observed that we could do with a bigger Navy. And actually, you will always have more tasks for a Navy than there are ships, by dint of the fact that we're a maritime nation. I mean, you will all be aware of our dependency upon the sea. The figures are trotted out very regularly. They've almost become trite, but I think they're just worth rehearsing. The 90% of our trade by volume travels by sea, but 99% of our data, and therefore our financial data, travels on seabed cables. So we have a dependency upon the sea, which is both economic and security, that mandates a Navy that is ready to meet a range of security tasks. And the very fact of the uncertain geopolitical context we find ourselves in today would point to that range of tasks being very considerable.
So the emergence of an issue in the Middle East that you will need to be ready for will naturally, in the light of the fact that we need a bigger Navy, have ensured that you have less time available to ensure that you're ready for example, a challenge for a peer adversary. It must follow.
That's why for us, having such a high proportion of the fleet at high readiness or very high readiness is so important on a rolling basis. Maritime readiness is not something you can suddenly magic up. If you're taking a ship out of refit, and Steve perhaps could explain for the committee the sort of process at Heathrow, if you're bringing a ship out of deep maintenance or refit, crewing it and training it and bring it to a state of readiness, or bring it out of a maintenance period, that is something that requires time. And because of how quickly events can change, we therefore need to ensure that a significant proportion of the fleet is at high readiness throughout, so that we can respond in a timely fashion. And that's within our DNA. If you're forward deployed to some part of the world, as I've often been in my career, and the list of orders you sail on changes, you can't go running back to UK and go, oh, we weren't expecting that, we better have a rethink. You deal with what you've got at the time. And so a broader sense of preparedness, able to respond, is something that is implicit in maritime power, and what I try to drive the fleet to deliver for the Secretary of State.
Thank you. That is great for an opening session. Let's turn to some of the real detail and the issues. And I'd like to turn to Kevin Jones, please.
Thank you, Chair. With the development of the NATO force model and regional plans, what will change in terms of the effects it will have on the Navy's readiness?
Because we already allocate a significant amount of the operational fleet to NATO under the current model, the shift to the new force model is frankly going to make very little change to the way we think. The commitment is already significant. And therefore, what the new force model, the new regional plans means for me and for the way we force generate is it gives us greater clarity on the range of tasks we might have to fulfill, the allies and partners within NATO that we are likely to fulfill them, and therefore we can really focus the sort of thinking, both conceptual and training-wise, to those that we could find ourselves under fire with to maximise the operational capability we offer. We've been doing this for some time. Members of the committee no doubt have visited operational sea training down off Plymouth, where a number of our NATO partners send their ships to train. The NATO maritime structure for developing warfighting capability is well built, and that is not being changed. It is being sharpened by the change to the NATO force model that's coming across. But we already allocate more of our maritime force almost proportionally than any other nation in NATO. And so for us, that level of commitment remains a truth.
So it's not an increase in need in terms of it's within the envelope you've already got dedicated towards NATO. Is that what you're telling us?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, NATO would like to draw down on it more regularly because, of course, this, apart from those forces that are going to be deployed under NATO command and control, and I would observe at the moment, that we've, in the last year, we've had forces under NATO command and control, OPCON is the technical term, allocated for the best part of a year now, including, unusually at times, an SSN and an aircraft carrier. These are significant commitments for us where we're allowing NATO to determine how these units are deployed. But the readiness factor that we apply, which is what a lot of the NATO force model is about, is something that we've grown up with. And if they wish to draw them down, then we merely take those units from what they're doing at the time and bring them under the NATO umbrella. These are choices that can be exercised by the Secretary of State at the day. But we just need to make sure that we can continue to fulfill the requirements placed upon us. The new force model is going to make, I think, some quite demanding statements around the capabilities that we put, and that might be something that we could cover in the closed session in due course as to what that will feel like. But the concept in itself and that scale of contribution feels entirely comfortable to me.
Can I just ask in terms of the commitment, because clearly you've just said that you can't just turn this on like a tap when you need a ship and turn it off again when you don't want. There's obviously that training cycle and things through. So in terms of our commitment to NATO, how long does that last, and is it continuous in terms of are you regenerating something else then to replace it? Can you just talk us through exactly how it operates in practice?
Some of the tasking is specific, so there'll be a specific capability. So recently, as an example, it was the command platform. So HMS Prince of Wales was generated specifically for that task. HMS Duncan, this calendar year, has been the flagship in the Mediterranean. And then others are much more dynamic. So the conversation with my NATO colleagues is an almost daily one, looking at that envelope. And some of it is pre-planned, can I have a specific capability? Others is in a response to contingency. And so a trade space with other nations as to who can do what at a particular time. But by our training protocols and all that we do is within a NATO construct. As a Navy, we're very, very able to dynamically integrate within a NATO construct. Our training off the south coast and the north coast of Scotland is all around a NATO framework. So our units are absolutely, can operate hand in glove at the drop of a hat.
Redmond, can you just talk us through, for example, let's take HMS Duncan. It's obviously committed to NATO tasking. What's the time it spends there, and what's the recovery time in terms of just getting an understanding of how it actually works in practice?
So a platform will be generated for that specific task, a deployment, and then when they come home, the platform fundamentally requires a period of maintenance. But throughout that operating cycle, we operate a trickle drafting so that people will just come and go routinely. It's not a huge, significant reset as you might see with other armed services. So the ship in itself can probably go away again, ideally with 5-6 weeks of maintenance, but then you can go away again. So as we saw on the back of the carrier deployment in 2021, those units that went deployed at the end of January, having been back alongside for 6 weeks in response to Ukraine. Some of the people have changed, we've continued training, but the platform can go again. So you can maintain that readiness cycle in a pretty agile manner.
And as our assets come out of NATO tasking, other nations fill in?
Absolutely. So Duncan will hand over potentially to a French unit or a Dutch unit or whoever it be, and that's part of that pre-planned methodology.
That sits alongside the overall readiness scale. You'll be aware that NATO demands some things to be available in days for you to move, other things can be at 30 days to move. Providing we are delivering the number of frigates or destroyers that are at 30 days to move, NATO wants to know the names of them, but it doesn't specify the names of them. So we're able to cycle ships through, but what we are able to do is to maintain, once you've generated something out of deep refit, gone through all the stages of training, you can then sustain high readiness for quite a period of time before you then need to roll it out to be replaced by something else.
When you talk about high readiness, what's that? What's that actually mean in practice?
High readiness is a way of describing a level of training, a level of sustainment, a maintenance and equipment availability standard, all of which has been brought together so that you can sit there and know with confidence that the ship or the commando unit is capable of fulfilling a range of tasks, responding at very short notice, and they have the wherewithal to meet it. You don't need to suddenly take them away and put them through another training bit because you hadn't foreseen that was it.
And those tasks are clearly, you know what they are in advance from NATO, that you've got A, B and C tasks that you need to train for so that you actually know you can do them.
We do indeed. And we have a well-established sort of methodology of thinking through what those tasks might mean. Any particular direction the Chief of Defence Staff will be put into his directive to us. We then generate against that standard, which NATO has full transparency of, in order to say this unit is available to you over a sustained period of time. And agility is an essential part of that because, as I said earlier, if you're deployed and the task changes, you can't come rushing back home to UK to reset. You have to deal with it at the time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I talk about some of those issues in a bit more detail, a bit more conceptually? You've spoken about readiness in the context of NATO readiness, and essentially you are saying there's a range of tasks for which you have to be fully trained, and you're able to deploy them at a certain readiness window, which means time, essentially. And the same, you are, I think in answer to Mr. Jones, you were talking about that in the context of NATO assigned units. Presumably the same would apply for non-NATO assigned units, for anything that we need to do outside of NATO.
Absolutely. So I think the story of HMS Dauntless would be a good one, Steve.
Yeah. So HMS Dauntless generated out of a long maintenance period where her propulsion program was updated.
Thank you very much.
For that. And direction came that we wanted to have a presence in the Caribbean during the core hurricane season. Yeah. So with weeks' notice, we designed a bespoke training package. So that platform was crewed and equipped and trained accordingly and dispatched. And as you know, he's only just finishing up now and will return home. But that was done in a really agile manner, in the space of weeks, in order to get a hull into that theatre at the right time, and subsequently had huge success, not only there for hurricane, but wider work with security agencies out there in counter-narcotics operations.
Presumably those 4 or 5 tasks that you are ready for at a certain readiness window, be that 48 hours the week or whatever it may be, isn't wholly, it'll be exclusive. It won't encompass every possibility. And what is the position if a task arrives that is outside?
If we wanted to redeploy Dauntless to go into something higher end, then we would offer a bespoke training package, and we could do that on the passage back across the Atlantic. Yes. Some of this we can do synthetically while she's on transit. We could fly people out there. There's a whole host of ways of doing it, but we'd be talking days not weeks before that could re-roll. Had we had more time in the first place, we could have trained her up for all of that before she went to the Caribbean. Time wasn't on our side.
And that's the essence of the matter, isn't it? Because if we're talking about readiness, the question back would be readiness for what?
Yes.
Because there is everything that you might be asked to do, from peer adversary down to supplying aid for a disaster zone, as you've rightly said. So the readiness for what then depends presumably upon the reporting system that there is with MOD. How agile is that in terms of preparing for different eventualities to shape the advice that you give to ministers?
So the MOD's capability assessment process, readiness process, specifies a number of potential scenarios, and I'm sure they again will be explored in the closed session, and each of those scenarios will then mandate certain capabilities within certain platforms, and we will train to those and equip to those and store to those. Now, in some areas, in truth, we have to take some risk, because if you could spend your whole time just training and not actually doing. So in some areas, we'll make a risk judgment that says the likelihood of that is relatively low, because the demanding nature of training to that level whilst dealing with everything else is a compromise. But we are aware of it, and the point that you can then put into the reporting system is, if there was a redeployment required, and I think Dauntless would be a good example, if there is a redeployment required, then there will be some form of top-up necessary, but we will minimise that top-up. If you were to take Dauntless when she gets back, having been deployed for 6 months, you'll probably need a bit of engineering work. How do we minimise that with some risk judgments? What training can we do alongside that using the simulators ashore? How can you very quickly then recover the specifics that will allow a ship to deploy into a different set of specified tasks? But our baseline is designed that those top-ups are clearly understood. And so if something has been prepared to be at high readiness or very high readiness, then we've got a pretty clear understanding of the gap analysis that is necessary there, partly because we need to know that we can close that gap. And that is an essential part of the thought process behind the reporting tool.
Part of my formal handover of a platform is exactly that, articulating that delta, so the operational commander knows what that platform is and isn't capable of, and how long it may take to fill it.
So the operational commander will understand how much risk he or she is carrying set against a number of possible scenarios.
Absolutely.
And therefore ministers understand what risk they are carrying against whatever they may wish to be doing. So, and I'm glad first you've mentioned this point about risk, because presumably this is at the heart of this matter. It's what your attitude to risk is. You could have everybody at high readiness the entire time, but then you need a much bigger navy and much more resources, or you burn everybody out. Has the advice you're giving to ministers changed as a result of recent events?
I think what's changed in the conversations that I have with ministers and with CDS, because I have to recognise that actually the advice is CDS is to give, I advise here. So the conversations we are having absolutely have to reflect the immediacy of the threat that as we understand it, and the range of tasks that we have. It would be somewhat surprising if we weren't considering those in a very dynamic sense. So when you look at, for instance, the ships that have been announced as deployed, the littoral response group, we will have had a very real conversation about what are the capabilities they offer, and what are the means in which you could best employ those, and where might you be taking a risk envelope slightly higher. Now, I know from my own experience as Chief of Joint Operations previously that risk in an operational context is also a very dynamic thing, because you're looking at the benefit you want to accrue from the risk you're willing to expose that platform to. And that actually is the heart of the conversation between the operational commander, the Chief of Defence Staff, and ministers.
Now, given that, as you rightly say, the committee is of the view that we need a bigger navy, given the amount of tasks that you're faced to do anyway, given the increase in strategic challenges, we know what those are, we don't need to rehearse them, it would be fair to say, would it not, that we are carrying much more risk now than we were a couple of years ago?
I think I couldn't possibly disagree with that, because of the level of uncertainty. if we could specify exactly what was going to happen and when, then we could manage against that.
Well, it's not just uncertainty, though, first, is it? Because that's life. We always are in a position we don't know what's coming next, but we know that there are strategic challenges that we have, and the Middle East has presented us with another one over the course
absolutely
of the last
are,
month.
yes.
Okay.
I agree.
Mark Francois.
Thank you, Chair. We'll come on to this in more detail later on, First Signal. But if the job of the Navy is to contribute to deterrence and try to prevent war, but should deterrence fail to fight and to win, we have 17 frigates and destroyers on paper. How many of those could fight tonight? How many are operationally available today?
So, I am not mandated to have all of those 17 available to fight
We
tonight.
understand that, of course. Some have to be in refit, some have to be in maintenance. We do understand. To be fair, we wrote a report on it.
Yes.
But how many could fight tonight?
So, we maintain a readiness profile of which some can respond at very short notice, and some might require, if something is at 30 days notice, which is a perfectly respectable piece, they've come back from a long deployment, they're not required for immediate tasking, we can allow some more intrusive maintenance to take place. That, by the definition, fight tonight, they would fall short. But could they be quickly brought up to some form of readiness and deployed? Absolutely. The fleet in 1982 that Henry Leach deployed wouldn't have answered the question you've asked. The number deployed in a 72-hour period was far higher than anything that readiness profile would have been. But it became a moment of national endeavour and some sophisticated risk judgments as to what you could get away. So I am currently able to meet all of the tasks required of me by the defence plan from the frigate and destroyer force that is in the operational fleet.
That's really helpful, but you never gave us a number.
No.
So let's ask you again. How many?
Because the...
Is it in double figures or single figures?
A very high readiness is single figures, but that's because we maintain about 50% of the fleet at high readiness and above, and 17 divided by 2 is 9, 8.5.
8.5. Thank you.
So first, the point here is you say you have a readiness profile that you measure against. You're able to fulfil the ask that is made of you by CDS and by ministers. Shouldn't we be democratically scrutinising whether or not the task you are asked to fulfil is adequate?
Now, I believe... sorry, if your question is, should you be democratically scrutinising whether or not the tasks are adequate, then I can't respond. That's not mine to respond to, because I don't own the task allocation. I merely generate forces against that. So the range of tasks would be one for ministers. Whether or not I've got sufficient to meet the full range of tasks all the time in the way they would wish, well, as I said at the beginning, there's always a desire to do more than the fleet is actually capable of doing. And what we pride ourselves on is the degree of agility that will allow us to rebalance against what ministerial priorities are at the time. And dauntless again, we could over squeeze this particular example, but that was a piece of direction by the Minister of the Armed Forces in response to Foreign Office and government policy that to put a meaningful capability into the Caribbean during the core hurricane season. A number of ships were available that could have been retasked to do that, each of which came with a penalty, and the Minister of the Armed Forces determined upon HMS Dauntless.
Given that our task is to scrutinise what the MOD is doing and whether it is providing sufficient for the task you're able to do, we should be looking at, should we not, the defence planning assumptions and whether the force that you're able to generate against the assumptions is up to scratch. That would assist the Navy in ensuring it's ready, wouldn't it?
And I'm sure this is something that we could, because our defence planning assumptions are kept as a classified document, this would be something we could cover in more detail in a closed session.
Thank you first. Dr. Twinkle.
Sorry, just quickly, to follow on from the Chair's earlier question. I mean, obviously, you've already said you're very stretched, but you can't predict everything. But of course, we could see something happen in the South East Pacific, in the South China Sea, and then it's going to be really, really stretched then. So, as we all seem to agree, there should be a larger Navy. I just wonder, I'm not going to press you and say how many more ships or how many more assets or whatever, but in terms of large Navy, what would you really like additionally to what you've got now?
So, what I'd really like, if I could, would be to accelerate the pace of transformation from the ships that we've got on build and the submarines we've got on build at the moment to the new Navy. Because it's a tremendously exciting transformation that we're going through at the moment. The Type 26, world-leading ASW frigate. The Type 31s, I think, are a really innovative way of thinking differently about a general-purpose frigate. The new submarines we've got on order. And all of these are just about to arrive in strategic terms. And what that represents for us is, I think, one of the single biggest transformations in the history of the Navy, when we genuinely move from a kind of analog Navy into a digital Navy, something as powerful almost as when Jackie Fisher, my predecessor many back, took the Navy from sail and coal into oil, because it conceptually drove a different way of thinking, a different way of operating. So for me...
I understand that.
So for me, Mr. Twigg, the first thing I would really look forward to is that the acceleration to these new platforms, which will be more available than the old ones they replace, more capable than the old ones they replace.
Not a bigger Navy.
And more deployable than the old ones they replace, is a really important first stage in growing the Navy. But we have to get through this transformation from the old to the new first, before you then step forward into
that, and I
Navy.
accept all that, and it's perfectly reasonable what you just said. But again, I'll put the question back to you. If you had a choice, what additional asset or what would you like additionally to what you've got now that fits into the fact we'd like a bigger Navy?
So I would look at the most successful, most productive parts of the Navy at the moment, and point to broader, to double up on those. There is fantastic utility coming out of the offshore patrol vessels in terms of delivering United Kingdom presence around the world in a very cost-effective manner, and High Commissioners and ambassadors from the world regularly report diplomatic telegrams as to the impact those ships are having. I look at the journey that our amphibious fleet is going to undertake over the next few years and recognise the importance of the Commando Forces. I think these are really key elements of the future design, and so making sure that we're maximising our capacity and capability there. But the previous Secretary of State has sort of pointed to that programme when he announced the MRSS decision, which will go jointly with the Dutch. I think these are the things that really give us a chance to do some of the stuff that the Royal Navy is fantastic at, which is thought leadership amongst other navies. We'll never be the biggest. That's not a gift that's going to with us. I don't think that matters. But what we do want to do is to make a really effective and influential contribution around the world. And those are the sort of platforms beyond the current plans that are currently in place that I think would make a huge difference.
Your priority. Right, okay.
Mark, thank you. Firstly, we appreciate all that, but some of the challenges for which you as the Royal Navy are not responsible for is that these new ships, which you make a great deal of, are not always on time. So Babcock build the Type 31, the Venturer class. The first of those comes into service in 2027, so that's 4 years from now. They're in a financial dispute about the cost of those ships with the department, but they're apparently keeping to time. The Type 26 frigate, first of class HMS Glasgow, the IOC keeps slipping. It's now late 2028. So it will have taken 11 years to lay the keel, build the ship and bring her into service. The Japanese build the equivalent ship in between 3 and 4 years. Again, it's not the Navy's fault, but how are you going to maintain the operational readiness that you need when these critical ships, highly capable though they are years late, certainly in the Type 26 case?
So we have to be ruthlessly focused on where we apply resource effectively, and what are the key tasks and the key capabilities that the fleet that need in order to maintain that. And the absolute priority for me is to ensure that we're providing support to our delivery of the deterrent in the North Atlantic. And so making sure that we're maintaining a sufficiently robust and resilient ASW capability through means that I do need to take at times what look like on the surface some very difficult prioritisation decisions against the money that is accorded to me to do so.
Right.
Because we've been left, and we've had this discussion before, but I'm very happy, we've been left because of the, not just the challenges of bringing these ships in, and these are complicated first prototypes that are being built here. It's, I think we sometimes forget that you wouldn't take the first car off a production line and sell that to the public, but we're trying to take the first ship off the production line, bring it into services as quickly as we can, working with our industrial partners.
Yes, but with respect, it's equally complicated. It's a challenge for the Japanese, and they suffered from COVID too, yet they managed to do it in a third of the time.
I'm very happy to explore this probably out of committee, but I'm not sure the like-for-like comparison stands up to being quite a third of the time. I've certainly had conversations with my Japanese opposite number about this.
Well, it's a lot quicker.
But if your fundamental point is it going to be a challenge for us to keep some very old ships going all the way through into the early 2030s as part of this transition? Yes, it is.
Fine, so let's just quickly then move on to the type. So you've got to run the Type 23s on until these new ships arrive. Some of them will have to serve for 35 years in order to make everything fit, and that's way beyond their service life. You refitted Iron Duke. Well, you didn't. Babcock did. It took 4 years. It cost over £100 million for one ship. And she's finally rejoining the fleet. There are strong rumours that HMS Westminster will not be refitted because she's in such a poor condition, because she's so old, poor thing, after many years loyal service to the Crown, that you've written her off because it's not economic to repair her. So then we're down to 16 for the next few years. What is the status of Westminster, and have you written her off?
Work continues today with Westminster in preparation for her upkeep. No decisions have been made. And continually with those frigates, I absolutely recognise the age of them. Some of them have already served 30 years or so, and we have to manage it. It goes back to the conversation about risk and how much you use today, and our advice into ministers and through CDS, exactly that. We've learnt a lot through recent ships coming through upkeep about how, and this is part of the transition that we're desperate to make into Type 26, in how we can maintain our ships differently. And we spoke about this previously when we met in the Military Defence. If we can embrace a more commercial and agile model rather than what you would recognise as a sort of boom and bust, where long refits, as you've just described, of trying to get at it much more. Now we're seeing that the fruits of that in some of the 23s already, and that's what we're going to have to embrace over the next 8, 9, 10
sorry,
years.
the problem with these, there's never enough time in these hearings, so I do apologise for cutting across you, but we need to try and get to the nub of it. 4 years to refit a frigate. Even by British standards, you could build one from scratch in as much time. Certainly Babcock seemed to be on target to do that. So we spend 4 years refitting a very old ship. We could build a new one just as fast. Why don't we do more? Why don't we build more of the new ones and stop refitting so many of the old ones?
But this, Mr. Francois, is one of the choices that when we count up the fleet, what we've got to focus on is, have I got enough operational fleet to deliver what I need to do? And are we setting for the transition for the new so that we can, as seamlessly as possible, bring in the new to replace the old? So if you sit there and count, this is the number of ships we've got. It's going to be 4 years to refit Westminster as a minimum, we think, but that work is going on at the moment. That takes us to 2027. We'll be on the verge of a new one, but we're not counting HMS Glasgow in that emerging fleet.
You can't. She doesn't come until 28.
But the point is, we should, in next year, I'm going to counter on that 4 years, because that looks like the overall fleet numbers we've got. We've got a tremendous fleet that's coming in build. The question is, have I got enough to deliver against the range of tasks in the operational fleet? Have I got enough ships?
Again, for the record, this is mainly industry that has done this to you, not the Royal Navy. I think it's important to emphasise that. But you haven't said that you're not going to refit Westminster, but you haven't said that you are. So I think we're long enough in this game to know what that means. So we're down to 16. And when we did an inquiry into procurement as a committee, or as a subcommittee, we gave 3 examples, one from each service, of where it had gone horribly wrong. Ajax for the Army, Wedgetail for the Air Force, and Type 26 for the Royal Navy. Can you please assure us that you're doing everything you can in private to keep industry up to the mark? Because so far, they are letting you down.
So we are working extremely closely with industry. They fully understand the concerns. We have regular conversations, not just about the fact that this is a shipbuilding program, but actually this is about delivering greater maritime capability to cope with a range of increasing challenges in the North Atlantic and globally deployed. So there is an end point to this which is beyond just the delivery voyage of HMS Glasgow or any of her sister ships into this is so that we have world-leading capability to deal with those who may wish us harm, and getting that sense of purpose into BAE Systems. And to their credit, if you're up at Govan now, it feels very different in terms of that overall commitment and the workforce engagement into this, as it does at Rosyth for the Type 31s, just as I'm sure it will do in Holland.
For the record, so we went to Govan to see for ourselves, and they only admitted to us that the IOC on Glasgow, we spent a whole day there, the IOC for Glasgow was slipping as we were going out of the door to race for the airport to get our flight. So I don't think BAE were as transparent and open about the problems as they might have been. I mean, we were literally about to load the bags on the minibus when they coughed it up.
And one of the other things that I really hold BAE Systems to account, and we do, is whatever is happening to Glasgow, the rest of the class must not be affected in the same way. So there is, and I'm not here to defend a shipbuilding industry, but they also are fundamental to the Royal Navy being able to do. So they are partners in this endeavour. What is really important is that we don't see a knock-on effect, and that the learning that they take from the journey of HMS Glasgow translates into HMS Cardiff, translates into HMS Belfast, and into the Batch 2, which is now on order as well, so that the drumbeat picks up. And providing we see that, then from my point of view, notwithstanding some of the frustrations that you point to at the moment, I think we will see ourselves set on a stable path quite soon.
Lastly, your predecessor in that job described managing to juggle all of this and keep the schedules going and a number of ships available as alchemy. I think to some of us on this committee, it's starting to look like fool's gold. Anyway, back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. Very true.
Admiral, can we just move away just from operational readiness to war-fighting readiness? And could you tell us what you've done in the last 2 years to make basically the Navy better for that? And maybe you just want to comment as well on munition stockpiles. We heard in CGS last week that it's the thing that keeps him awake most at night.
So I think you're referring to the transition from being porcupines into something that is of increased lethality and greater combat availability, and we are definitely on a significant journey. We really welcome the investment that has been made with the NATO strike missile and the contributions that the Norwegians are giving to allow us to increase our strike capability across the frigate fleet. I think that's a tremendous step forward. We continue to look at what the future weapon mix will need to be, and when you look at some of the opportunities that are going to emerge either through AUKUS Pillar 2 or other tech innovation programs that are going on at the moment, so that we can understand hypersonics better, directed energy weapons better, and the like. It's all part of the mindset that we need to make as this sort of permanent transition that's going on. Right at this moment in time, though, very much as my fellow chiefs, we're also looking very carefully at the lessons that we can draw from what's going on in the Black Sea. Our Ukrainian partners are fighting and learning with incredible courage and tenacity in that environment, and have been very generous with the observations and lessons that they are sharing with us as to what that means for stockpile management would be a good example in that. And we are just making sure that we are not kidding ourselves that some of the assumptions that we've got in the system are unduly safe. That requires us to work very closely with our supply chain, our industrial partners, to make sure they understand the imperatives of what's going on, and in many areas they've responded really strongly to the challenges we've placed upon them. So I'm confident that we're on a journey of improvement. Would I
In terms of warfighting?
Would I wish to be, yes. Would I wish to be further down that journey than where we are at the moment when we see what's going on currently? Yes, of course I would. But I've been very grateful for the accelerants that we're now enjoying the benefit of.
Yeah, and so is basically the munition stockpile a worry for you?
Sorry, I missed it.
Is munition stockpiles a worry for you?
I need to draw stuff.
I think it's a concern for all of us, because one of the things that we have to be ruthlessly honest about is that what we've seen taking place in Ukraine and off the coast of Ukraine in the Black Sea and all the rest of it has challenged a lot of us in the way that we thought about future conflict in the European theatre. And for a number of reasons, over a number of years, driven by national financial envelopes or whatever, a number of risk positions were taken in operational capability. There were clearly ones that my predecessors were content to take at the time, but you have to adapt when circumstances change. And what we've learned is that no one was predicting war in Southeast Europe to be as we find ourselves today. So we have to observe and learn from that, and then adapt as quickly as we can to ensure that we are not found short. And we could have a separate debate another time about the likelihood of it, but should the conflict there broaden out across wider Europe. And of course, I'd also observe that if we do find ourselves in a NATO setting, then we're not doing this alone. Allies and partners would be with us, and so we mustn't allow ourselves to get sucked into a kind of conflict that says the Russian Navy's got all of this and we've got all of that. That's a completely false comparator. It becomes part of an alliance effort should we find ourselves in that sort of a conflict.
The other part to your training, mate, was the training. Yes. So our training has, over the last 2 years, has changed significantly in our understanding of the threat. So a lot more, the training is very much now 21st century, and it probably was lagging in some respects.
To be better warfighters.
Better warfighters. Yes. So synthetics and virtual, where you are training our junior operators against threats that are realistic, hypersonics. These are not aircraft flying at 200 knots. These are now targets flying at 1,000 knots. So the training is much, much more realistic and demanding on our people. So I can again look at the operational commander in the eye with far more assurance of the capability that they are getting.
This takes me to the point about the amount of tasks that are available that you can do, given that the more you're asked to do, the less time there is and space in the programme there is for you to do that training.
Yes, but I think the way that we're doing our training now in synthetics, it's a much easier way of doing the training. Before it was quite procedural. Ship would have to go to sea. It would spend a period at sea doing it, and it was very much sequential activity. Now, with virtual training, an operations department in a warship can be training for warfighting alongside, whilst the engineers on that platform are doing routine maintenance. So it's now concurrent activity. So I'm not saying you save half the time, but it's a much more efficient way of generating a platform. So previously, when a hull would come out of refit, it would be periods of months, close to a year, to generate it for operations. We've cut that right down now, and the quality is far better.
Sarah Atherton.
Thanks, Chair. Can I talk about the submarine service? So some of your boats are tired, reported fires on board, overstretched with the maintenance schedules versus your commitment. One of the bombers has just returned from a deployment of 196 days. I'm told the longest is 207 days underwater. So my question is, what risk assessments are you making about the morale and the operational effectiveness and the behaviour of your submariners when deployments are getting longer and longer?
So, if you were to ask me what keeps me awake at night, it's the well-being of the people that we ask to go to sea on our behalf and their families. Because we ask a huge demand of them, of which the submarine service go through significant periods of real social isolation from the people they love. And therefore, always at the forefront of my mind is whether or not we are supporting them and their families as best we possibly can to ensure that the pressures that are inevitably felt by them are mitigated or eased or supported as best we can. I don't think any of us at the moment feel particularly comfortable with some of the really challenging length of submarine maintenance periods that are necessary and what that plays out. It's a great joy that HMS Vanguard is currently going through all successfully through the sea trials through her long period of maintenance. But it's no secret that that period of maintenance was many years longer than it should have been, and that has had a concurrent knock-on into other parts of the submarine service. And so there is a huge amount of work going on between us, the Submarine Delivery Agency, and our industrial partners to work out how we can be more targeted, more effective, and frankly more productive over the necessary maintenance that we have to put into submarines that are old. And these very complicated, complex bits of kit have a very demanding safety case associated with them, and meeting the requirements of that safety case is, to my mind, absolutely critical, as well as the operational capability we want within them. And so we have to find ways of being as effective as possible so that the burden that is felt by the sailors and their families is minimized. Have we got that right yet? No, we have not. Have we got more to do? Are there more ideas in the mix? Absolutely. I've got a Tiger team reporting to me tomorrow who have been told to think as freely and without any constraint as possible, and they were sort of supported to break off some of the shackles of having been in the service a long time themselves, so that how could they really think the unthinkable, because we may find it's not unthinkable, it's just difficult. And it's not the sort of thing we would wish to do. I haven't had that brief yet, so I'm not in a position to speculate on what their ideas are, but I have been told that some of it is extremely imaginative, but some of it is going to be a completely different paradigm to the way we've thought. And if that's where we need to go, then I'm absolutely determined to go there, and I know that I have full ministerial support in that endeavour.
Can you just explain, out of interest really, what effect does sea growth and algae have on protective tiles? So it's well publicised, Vanguard came back white and green. What impact did that have on stealth and operational effectiveness?
So we clearly keep under close analysis the signatures of submarines, and we survey them on a regular basis. And the things that we will learn from the recent very long patrols being undertaken by a number of submarines is something that will no doubt be reported to me in due course, but forgive me if I don't sit in public forum and say whether or not I think the mitigation of that's for the closed session, I think.
I've said it, Admiral, it's all right.
Thank you. Mark-Francois.
Respecting that, let's talk about SSNs, attack submarines, and leave the deterrent for another time. The Navy has always prided itself on the fact that those who volunteer for the submarine service, those who wear dolphins, are volunteers. But we now read that you've run out of volunteers and you're having to get people to serve in the submarine service who didn't initially volunteer to do it. Is that true?
At the moment, everybody who comes to serve in the Royal Navy is a volunteer.
Yes.
Not all of them will necessarily get their first choice of fighting arm when they come in through the front door. That's not new news. That has been the case for some time. When I was a junior officer going through a very early officer watch course, on my course of, I think there were 8 of us, 3 of us were liable for submarine service, and there were only 2 volunteers. One of us was told that they were going into the submarine service. He went on to serve many years very happily, but it was not his first choice. He wanted to go into the Fleet Air Arm.
All right, thank you for clarifying that. That's a very clear answer, First Sea Lord. On the attack boats, it's widely publicised, it was all over the internet, it was in Navy Lookout, that a couple of months ago we didn't have a single one at sea, I think for the first time in living memory. That is operational failure, isn't it?
If there was no need for those boats to be at sea, then that's not operational failure. The boats on that particular day, we were meeting the readiness profile that was required, and you can be alongside and at very short notice to sail, and if that's the right place to put a boat at the time, then that's entirely sensible. And the photograph you're referring to, if it had been taken 2 days later, would no doubt have painted a different picture. We've got to be very careful that we don't confuse being at sea with readiness, because otherwise what you get, and this is one of the reasons why the letter to the to the Shadow Lead for Defence, John Healy, talks about a different way of measuring productivity of the fleet. It was because days at sea is quite a simplistic measurement. Because what it then doesn't demonstrate is that a ship alongside HMS Spey in Tonga providing disaster relief after they'd suffered a typhoon scores a 0. What it means is that a Type 45 HMS Diamond alongside in Gotland Island, supporting the Prime Minister as he hosts his Swedish opposite number, scores a 0.
With respect, First Sealer, we're not talking about patrol vessels. We're not even talking about high-end Type 45 destroyers. We're talking about attack submarines, which cost £1.5 billion each a go now. 2 Astute class still to come. Very long delays in the programme. And now you can't monitor Russian submarines, which you often tell us are very active. We believe you. You can't monitor Russian submarines in the North Atlantic if you're tied up alongside.
But equally, if there are no Russian submarines in the North Atlantic, why would we need to deploy one of our own submarines? Because then we're burning up core time, we're burning up sailors' time, we're using time that could be used more efficiently and effectively elsewhere. And then we deploy those submarines when we need to, which is built into an intelligence picture which we share with our allies and partners under a very sophisticated operation which has been running for some time. And again, the details I'll be very happy to explore with the committee in closed session.
Come on, sir. Not having one SSN at sea is an embarrassment. Come on.
No, I refute that. There was no need for any of those submarines to be at sea that day. Now, would I like the fleet to be more broadly deployed all of the time and doing active things? Because submariners want to be busy and active. They do. But we have to manage it against a likely range of tasks so that we're deploying our small number of SSNs as effectively and as efficiently as possible.
Well, let's ask you the same question we asked about surface vessels. Your answer was 8.5. We have 6 SSNs, 5 Astutes, 1 very tired Trafalgar class. We've got 2 Astutes yet to come. How many of those boats could put to sea tonight?
Well, I can put to sea the number I'm expected to put to sea, and if we took some risk judgments around the maintenance profile of those that are at lower readiness, then in some order, and I'm not an expert on these things, then I'm sure we could put more to sea because their crews are available. This is a profile. I'm not expected. I don't think you're expecting me to be able to say I could put all of those submarines to sea today.
No, but I want to know that you could
I can meet the numbers that I'm required to put to sea.
We're not
today.
expecting you to say you could put all of them to sea. We know better than that, but we'd like to know that you could put half of them to sea. Could you put 3 to sea?
I can put to sea. I can put 3. I can put 3 to sea. I'm actually sure that's half the fleet.
You could do that.
Yes, whether I need to do it or not, it's a different matter.
All right.
Because of the compromises that we would, I go back to some of the judgments that Henry Leach had to make in 1982 in order to achieve the task group.
These are sensitive matters, so I think we'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. First, we've got a number of other topics to cover and very little time to do it. And Gavin Robertson.
Thank you, Chair. Admiral, good afternoon. Nice to see you again. This is the sort of the table that you're referring to in the letter to John Healy. Just from my perspective, it is thoroughly useless. That is not to dismiss the point that you wish to make, which is to distinguish sea days to days of readiness. That's a fair point to make. But the aggregate data, which doesn't give you any sense when it gets down to individual ships or effective readiness, or into some of the detail Mr. Francois was asking, is not there in that form. And if you're able to explore that in private session with us a little more wholesomely, that would be good. But the most disappointing trend is that in each and every area there's a marked decrease over the last 10 years of readiness. And the second point I wish to make is, I think it is a truism that you shared, that we, yes, are in NATO and we have allies to rely upon, and therefore we don't need to be in a position where we are singularly deploying all of the time or present ourselves in that way. But when the United Kingdom, as a significant contributor to the NATO, is relying more and more heavily on that rationale, there is a problem. And it is an increasing part of MOD's lexicon, an increasing part of the service's position, that you can't be expected to, and nor should you be in a position to deliver all tasks required. We're relying on that more so, and that concerns me. So I just share that. in what you have answered in terms of readiness, and we've talked about operational readiness, we've talked about warfighting capacity, you have mentioned, and General Sir Nick Carter, when he was here, talked about the need to consider sustainment. So could you outline for us just initially what you consider sustainment to mean?
Sustainment is an ability to remain deployed and effective, and that brings to it a range of factors. What are the onboard holdings you've got? What are the holdings that you've got available to you within the locality, the task group, or whatever? What does your supply chain look like in order to ensure that you can remain deployed and readily capable? And ultimately, as we're discovering with those that we have forward deployed for very long periods of time, are you also able to undertake maintenance in various parts of the world without coming back to the United Kingdom? And that combination then gives you a sustained basis upon which you can deliver warfighting capability from the range of platforms you've got.
What is your assessment of Royal Navy's current sustainment?
Well, with the new ships, the Type 45s coming through PIP and all the rest of it, we're actually moving into an increasingly good position because we've got younger ships. They're well supported. The supply chains are maturing. When you look at the Batch 2 OPVs, forward deployed around the world, very high levels of availability. And actually, as we're seeing with the ships, Spey and Tamar, we're also able to do capability upgrades to them now in the deployed setting, which is not something we've necessarily done in the past. But we have to be honest that the sustainment of older ships is an increasing challenge. These are very demanding. The old 23s are very demanding ships to maintain, and their supply chains are under a huge amount of pressure. And all of that focuses on the engineers that are on board and their professional skill and resilience in order to keep these ships available. And I absolutely applaud all naval engineers. I'm the very proud grandson of a naval engineer. I know there's a son of a naval engineer in the audience. These are phenomenal men and women who in sometimes tremendously uncomfortable circumstances do a great job of maintaining sustained capability for us. But we shouldn't take our eye off that for some of them it's a very tough ask. Steve, is there anything you want to add?
Or sustaining a Type 23 forward for a number of years, MCM's in the Gulf now for over 10 years, our Batch 2 patrol vessels as well now into their third year, and we are one of very, very few nations in the world that could deploy a carrier task group to the other side of the world in the middle of COVID with very, very little host nation support anywhere, and sustain that for 7 months. So your point on NATO, I would slightly challenge in that a number of NATO nations want to be with us because we can do it and they can't. And they therefore see us as the convening power to come with us on those deployments.
Thank you, sir. Admiral, you mentioned maritime engineers, particular pinch point at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it down to overtasking of naval assets? Is it down to insufficient numbers? Is it down to lack of recruitment? What do you put it down to?
I think it's down to the fact that the nation is short of engineers, and we invest skills and capabilities into people that make them very attractive in the broader marketplace. And we know, therefore, that if we don't, and we've learnt this lesson over many years, if we do not properly enable them to be engineers by providing them with the right tools and the right spares and the right support at the right time, then that can be a very frustrating experience for them. When you then add on to that the demands of operational programs, which can lead to periods of separation, whilst they and their families are very proud of the fact that they wear Royal Naval uniforms, they feel that they're making a huge difference. Those professional frustrations can sometimes mean that they look very attractive to other people. And because there is this national shortage of engineers, then, not surprisingly, we can find ourselves losing out. Now, we're not complacent about that. I don't wish that to be the case. We still have a lot of young people wishing to come and join the service because they recognise the apprenticeship schemes and the training we give is very attractive to them. It's a really positive investment, and what an exciting way of doing an apprenticeship scheme. I met some of the young apprentices on board HMS Prince of Wales just a few weeks ago off the States, and they were living their best life. my goodness me, they were operating on board a fifth-generation aircraft carrier off the eastern seaboard of the United States, flying jets by day, and then just occasionally we went alongside and maybe they got to go and have an ice cream ashore. You know, what a fantastic investment. And if we can bottle that enthusiasm and keep them properly supported and make them feel appreciated and contribute, then I think we have a fighting chance. But we have to be honest that in recent years, occasionally we take our eye off the ball on this, and then not surprisingly, we're reminded of their value to us.
Thank you.
And finally on this, Sarah Atherton.
Thank you. Admiral, you talked about young, talented people living their best life. Young officer, been in the Navy 5 years, now on his second 18-month holdover. In 5 years, he's been to sea 8 days. He's completed his Sea King and Jupiter phases and was waiting for his operational flying training on the Merlin. He believes he'll be over 30 by the time he's operational. Wildcat pilot training. He's completed initial training on Juno and Jupiter and is also on his second 18-month holdover before starting Wildcat training. They are suggesting this is due to lack of observers. I don't know whether that's one of the recent pinch points. But what is this saying? How do we keep our young talent? Who is paying for the retraining of these pilots because of the length of the time of the holdover? Is it Ascent? Is it the taxpayers? What about operational readiness? And what are we saying to the future talent of the Royal Navy when this is happening to them?
The flying training pipeline, I think you've tracked for a number of years, has not been where we'd want it to be, together with challenges in availability of the aircraft in themselves to train on, has compounded to make that a really challenging situation. As the titular head of the Fleet Air Arm, I live and breathe stories like that every day. So we are desperately trying to find rewarding employment for them in those holdovers, so their career is not stagnating. A number of them are doing other things and progressing other strands to their careers at the same time, in navigation certificates of platforms to make them more employable. We are starting to see that holdover shorten now, but there is no doubt about it. In the last few years, it has been unacceptable, both in fast jet training and in rotary wing, of getting people to the front line. A combination of that, of the pipeline in itself in its initial phases, and then aircraft on the front line to train them on.
But the fault this time looks as if it's down to the Royal Navy, availability of aircraft and observers, rather than Ascent.
As I say, two strands to it: the initial Ascent training pipeline, and then availability of Wildcat and Merlin on the front line to train them.
How are you going to hold this young talent? Because they, at the age of 30, they're not going to want to fly. They're going to work for the commercial airlines. How are you holding them?
Well, I think we're through that. The worst of that, those stories that you're seeing, those holdovers are now reducing, and people are beginning to come through. But in the last few years, it has been a challenge, as we've struggled to maintain numbers of aircraft on the front line to train them on.
These two examples are absolutely current.
Yes.
2 18-month holdovers, and you're saying that's improving?
It is improving now, so people that are coming through are not facing that length of holdover.
But, okay.
That's 3 years
for the
old,
record,
18 months.
I'm not sitting here saying, I don't think either was saying we like it. When I look at my own experience through flying training, Steve's experience through flying training, that's what it should have been. And through a series of decisions made over a number of years, we have found ourselves with a flying training system, which I'm sure this committee has looked at separately, which has been suboptimal. A huge amount of work has gone on to recover it, and I think we are seeing it. But we have to, I'm absolutely clear, it's very difficult for us to be anything other than frustrated because of this young talent that we're going to need into the future to deliver the Navy of the future, feeling as frustrated as they are.
As long as the frustration translates to action,
Absolutely.
we'll leave it with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
We certainly have looked at it, and we'll continue to look at it again.
Latest report.
Indeed. I'd like, on recruitment and reserves, a final question to Mark.
Very quickly, First Sea Lord. 3 billion for a carrier, 1.5 billion for a nuclear submarine, $1 billion for a Type 26. None of this works unless you have enough people who are sufficiently qualified. So recruitment is a challenge for the Royal Navy, as it is for the other services. There's a very long, good article in Navy Lookout that just come out all about that. I won't try and read all of that out now. The Army do it differently. They outsourced it to Capita, affectionately known to this committee as Crapita, and the Public Accounts Committee described the Crapita contract as a litany of failures. You know where this is going. There's a proposal to have a tri-service recruitment system, the Armed Forces recruiting programme in the future, for which Capita and others would bid. Would you rather keep a unilateral Royal Navy recruiting system, or would you prefer to go into the tri-service system, given the track record of the Army's experience?
So I breathe a sigh of relief that last time round the Army went it alone, but a huge amount was learnt from that process. And because
much of it brutal, but yes.
Yes, absolutely. I was overseeing Navy recruiting at the same time that Army recruiting was grinding itself almost to a halt at one point. My view is that recruiting is only going to become more challenging as we go forward. We are in a battle for talent. The national talent. It's not that this nation is short of talent, it's that there's many places for that talent to go, and we need to make the armed forces as attractive a place as it possibly can be for people to young people to come and commit to it. And therefore we need to make sure that the attract and engage process is as sophisticated and sharp as it possibly can. And I support the Armed Forces recruiting programme because that is where it is setting itself to be. What I think we are very alive to, and this is a regular conversation at Chiefs, is to make sure that the lessons that have been identified and learned, not just from our experience, but also from what the Australians have experienced, the Canadians, the New Zealanders, as they've gone to different recruiting systems, are absolutely baked into ours so that we don't make the same mistakes. I am absolutely confident that the benefit statement that the Army entertained in 2013-14, whenever it was, would look pretty similar to the benefit statement that we have today. So it was about the implementation and execution of the programme, not the intent that was there. So whatever it takes to ensure that we give ourselves the best chance of recruiting the talent we need and the diversity of perspectives and young people, I'm absolutely up for that. What I'm pretty clear about also, though, is that sailors recruit sailors, Marines recruit Marines. It's those stories that really matter. Yeah. If behind the scenes we're employing really modern marketing intelligence, we're employing really sophisticated digital techniques to make sure we're really targeted, that's really important. Making sure that the pipeline to bring people in has got, is as frictionless as possible in terms of the assessment.
Very quickly, sir, because we know you have to go. The AFRP programme keeps slipping. We understand privately it may now not go live until 2026 or even potentially 2027. So all the other arrangements are having to be run on. As the professional head of the Navy, even if we do go for that programme, are you concerned by how many years it's slipping by?
If it means that we get the programme right, I'm not concerned by the slip. What it does mean for me is that I need to make sure that my current recruiting system is as effective as possible, and wherever we can draw learning forward, then we need to exploit that. And the three recruiting organisations are already today exchanging information and best practice wherever we can, because we're in the same game, which is to encourage people to come in, wear the King's uniform and serve. Clearly, I'd like them all to be sailors or Marines, but I recognise some might want to be soldiers and some might want to be aviators. That's fine. I'd rather that they were coming in and doing that than going elsewhere because we want that talent. And AFRP is part of that programme going forward.
And lastly, is recruiting reserves more or less challenging than the regulars?
So at the moment, recruiting of reserves, interestingly enough in some areas, is proving easier because what they're signposting is what a potential work terms and conditions of service in the future might look like, which is not the traditional sort of linear model that I've had as my career, but something that is much more, and the Second Sea Lord has been on record as calling it a zigzag career, where you can spend some time in regular service, some time in reserve service, some time out in the commercial world doing something completely different and then coming back in. And we need to be absolutely ready to embrace that, because I think that is how people will want to work in the future. When I look at my 20-something sons, and they look at that I've been for one substantive job interview when I was 18, and I have been paid ever since on the result of that job interview. That's just not in their psyche. And when I look at some of the challenges and opportunities and risks that young people want to embrace with and all the rest of it, then we're going to have to go. And the Haythornthwaite remuneration study is, to my mind, incentivization program is a fabulous opportunity for us to rethink what those careers are. And what we see in the reserves, I think, is giving us some really interesting pathfinders to what a regular career might look like in the future.
If we may, Amron, I think your recruiters all those years ago made a good decision.
Thank you.
Chair.
Mark, thank you very much.